best of my ability.
Thank you. Please state and spell your name and provide your address for the record.
It is Glen Alden, G-L-E-N, and E as it was, and Alden, A-L-D-E-N, 1957 Taft Avenue, Garner, 50438. So, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have the correct file up? Good. All right. Can you please describe, what's that?
No, I was just surprised. I hadn't brought any visuals, you know. I'm just a retired farmer, and this is all sort of sophisticated. I didn't expect to walk into
You're doing fine.
anything quite so formal.
You're doing fine. Please describe the current use of your property and any plans you may have for a different use in the future.
I think we had planned to have it as farmed, as it has been for over 100 years, much as it is. So nothing special that way.
Can you provide a general description of the property, and is any of the following on your property? Buildings, waterways, timber, and when describing your property, if you don't mind, you describe where they are on the parcel using words. You're welcome to use the pointer. It's helpful. So we see it here.
It's a bare piece of ground. There is a 12-inch private tile that intersects that. That some neighboring land uses, and I have to maintain. The easements, other than right-of-way, and some of it has included one that doesn't seem to be there, some Hancock County Rural Electric and Wood out of Ohio. I have no idea what that's about. There is a telephone line buried in the east edge, and the railroad on the west edge that went through in 1870. They're pretty heavy-handed as to how they wrote their easement, but not much different than some.
So no timber or forest?
No timber, forest, buildings, other than the tile. See, yeah. I think that answers all those questions.
Any other easements than the ones you already mentioned?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other feature or condition that might be readily apparent, or that might not be readily apparent, and that might affect or be affected by the proposed project?
The corner by the railroad and the intersecting with the county road is a ponded area. And it doesn't seem to be able to be drained well. And they seem to be going to build a borehole there in order to possibly go under the railroad, which they haven't gotten permission to do yet.
Can we zoom out on the file just a little bit? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, can you describe any specific concerns you may have and any recommendation you have for the board to address your concerns?
There was really no better route because either it interferes with me or my neighbor. So in that sense, but there's a few places where possibly they could avoid some of my neighbors by being a little further away from them. But I'm not having gone through trying to calculate what that all would be. But these properties to the south are less than half a mile. My own property and my father are right at a half a mile. And then several other places are dangerously close. So, to recommend a route that's just a little bit different but no better doesn't seem to make any sense.
Okay.
To me, anyway.
Do you recommend an alternative route for the proposed line? And if so, I guess we just went over that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. So I think that concludes my questions to the parties.
Well,
Go ahead.
question 3 there, I have concerns as an owner of the property, but also as the chair of the township committee. So in somewhere along the line here, I'd certainly like to express some concerns there that are not unique. I mean, many of the other questions I have, I think, have been addressed, and I could only add to that as far as to the vagueness of the easement and the unfairness. And certainly some of the wording is a little confusing, and you try to look it up, but I'm no lawyer, so, you know, I don't know exactly what it is they're up to. And I guess that's part of it. But I don't know how you want to, should I mention some things about the responsibilities of the trustees?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's our responsibility to provide fire and emergency services by code. And there hasn't been as much emergency information provided, to my knowledge, that would have helped my fire departments. The Clemmy department would be part of this, and I think the eastern part of the line comes through the fire department of Garner. And so both of those are going to have some responsibility for safety in case of some unforeseen accident. And they have not near the information they need. And Clemmy certainly doesn't have the equipment or training that they need, although I know Summit has promised buku's amounts of material and money, but there's nothing in writing, just as there's nothing in writing about how well they're going to take care of these boreholes. The ag mitigation information doesn't really speak to the deep holes that may be, well, I don't even know how they're going to describe those boreholes under the county road and railroad. So and if I asked anybody that contacts me from Summit, they plead ignorance. So, you're kind of at a loss. The other thing, as far as trustees go, in the code, it also says that they're supposed to provide risk information to government agencies, and they certainly haven't gone very far in doing that. They began by saying that it was going to just be carbon dioxide back in their initial meetings. Then it went to liquid, and now it is something called a supercritical fluid or liquid. And so none of the rules or studies that I've heard or seen have dealt with anything like supercritical liquids. The amount of CO2 that would be just in that 1,000 feet I have is several ton. And if you expand that out from even 1,000 psi to ambient air pressure, why, that's a huge, huge cloud. And it would be more than overcome my area. Then the rescue people from Clemmy, which I'm responsible for, are on this side of on the south side of the pipeline. I'm on the north. And even if they had the ability to tell where this cloud was, they wouldn't be able to get past it to get me. So, I don't know. There's many, many issues, and it's really hard to organize all the points that you worry about. So I have pages of stuff, but I don't wish to bore you. So. But the township thing is, I think, important. And I think that's unique, at least to my testimony. Most of us landowners are going to have many of the same concerns. And the unknowing of this and the, what would you say, duplicity of the company is worrisome. So I would ask for questions if there were any.
Okay, did the parties have any questions? Ms. Ryan?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on some of what you just discussed about the emergency response. And what I'd like to know is, in addition to discussions of the needs of emergency response departments and first responders, have you heard any information about what types of advice or arrangements would be made for individuals who are living or working near a possible rupture?
The comment I heard was the suggestion was to shelter in place. Now, my father, who's 102, lives just south of me, would be just in the half-mile radius, which is considered safe, at least for hog confinements. Lives in a house that's over 100 years old. And wind blows through it. So I don't know that he'd be able to get out. It was interesting that I think I saw some testimony about the level of CO2 that was tolerated, but awful lot of other organizations such as OSHA thinks that 30 million or 30,000 parts per million is an awful dangerous level. And so I'm sure that would exceed that. And by then, someone is confused enough that I don't know if you'd make good decisions. Two, I'm not sure your vehicle would run, so you wouldn't be able to escape. So, you know, I mean, risk has at least two parts. One is frequency and one is severity. Now, we know that it's going to happen. We don't know where, we don't know how bad, but the severity seems pretty high in some cases. Now, out here in the rural, like where we're at, it only take out a couple homesteads, you know, not even a good mass shooting, you know. So that's no problem, but it, in the county, comes terribly close to Corwith, which several hundreds of people, and maybe that'd make the news, but the rest of us wouldn't so much.
And would you have any concerns about what the impacts would be, for example, if there were farmers who were out working in the field near a rupture?
Yes, because we don't know with this new equipment and the weight, how that's going to affect the pipeline. And the weight of the pipeline itself is interesting, I think, because if I've got a couple ton of product in that, you know, just what happens to it over time is interesting. And then with the traffic going over it with this equipment. And that lends itself to the ag mitigation, is I have no idea how heavy the equipment's going to be that they're going to construct this with. They don't tell us. They talk about two lifts, the topsoil and then the subsoils, but they don't say exactly whether they're going to do that with a backhoe or with a caterpillar, and the damage below the quote mitigated area is going to be substantial. I happen to be out in, I think it's Wyoming, but Turnagain Rock, and they have where you can still see the tracks on the prairie where the wagons went 100 and some years ago, 150 years ago. So what's this going to look like with, I mean, a wagon isn't very heavy compared to the construction equipment. Summit has changed the description of their easement to provide a access point from the south road there onto the area where they plan to bore under the railroad. but they don't indicate, like how heavy that equipment must be. It's a 12-inch hole or 12-inch pipe. And I don't know what happens to all the tailings. There isn't any description of that in my easement. So, and then if this hole is very deep, it's going to take a long time to settle. I've had big holes where we've done things around the farm place, and years later, it's still settling. And they're not, attempting to get them to think that that was their responsibility is going to be difficult, I believe.
Would it have been helpful for you to hear Summit answer questions about those types of issues in front of the Utilities Board before having to testify?
Oh, certainly would. I've been to a number of their public meetings and have sat in on the supervisors meeting with them. One of the, higher up people, but people who were supposed to represent some part of the industry, I guess. But generally they plead ignorance again on anything that deviates from the smallest points.
And one more question, going back to the emergency response issue. Coming from an emergency response perspective, what concerns would you have about injuries or being able to respond to someone who was working in the field near a pipeline rupture?
Well, you'd have to decide whether you wanted to risk your life or try to drag them out, I guess. And not knowing where the possible cloud is, makes that interesting. And to ask our volunteer firemen to do that. Now, the Garner Fire Department, which I also sit on that board, recently has bought the compressor and air equipment so they can last 45 minutes as opposed to 5 or 6, whatever the other is. But at some fair amount of cost, they have to both a natural gas tank and an anhydrous tank in that fire district. So they need more protective equipment than my people in Clemmy. And so they have a better chance of doing something. And in addition, hazmat is in Mason City, so that's 25 minutes, or 25 miles, I should say. What I saw for their emergency response system was if they found some indication of problem, they were to call the emergency manager of the county, if he happens to be in the office, I guess. And then they apparently alert, whoever, the fire and rescue. And the time lag there is, problematic, I believe.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, my name's Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club.
Okay.
And first of all, you're in Hancock County, correct?
Correct.
The map that's up on the screen, the portion in red is your property?
No. That goes up. No. That's the railroad where you got the pointer, where the pointer is, and it's green, I guess, from there up. Yeah. Red, I don't know why they've colored it the way they have.
Okay. So
The easement asks for 32 acres.
your property is
From the railroad to the middle of the road and to the middle of the road.
okay.
And which is interesting too, is that someone is getting easements for the entire property as if they couldn't put it on the public right of way. So they must feel that it's a private business and hence they need private easements.
Okay, so how many
My
acres?
guess.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just guessing because, just looking at their suggestion on the easement, then maybe trying to circumvent the county.
So how many acres do you have?
We have about 80 workable acres. So
That's
it runs north from there.
And that's the parcel that's labeled,
Yeah, the southeast corner of the 18th section.
it's labeled HC-006.
And soil type runs from Nicolette on the east to Calcooska on the edge of the railroad there, which is
Is there anything significant about those soil types that you think,
well, Calcooska is a relatively small group of soils. Apparently, it's a high calcium level and or high organic, and tends to pond. It's poor draining soil. So it and having farmed it for quite some time, when you work it wet, it doesn't like that, and it takes a while, years for it to sort of come back to where it ought to be. So drainage is very important. So,
can you take the pointer and show where the railroad track is that you talked about?
well, if I can run this thing, must have to push a button here somewhere. It's doesn't seem to make sense. Someone want to show me
It's this button right here.
okay. Shouldn't have been that hard, should it? Okay, there's the railroad running up with my shaky hand, and that's their pipeline. This is the road. Okay, it's just that. That doesn't work. So anything, that's
So where's the railroad?
that line there.
Oh, okay. Do you know how Summit intends to get across the railroad?
Apparently bore a 12-inch pipe under that. And I know it crosses into my neighbor's, a piece of property that we farmed for many years. And that's the same ponding problem on the other side of the railroad. The neighbor to the south brings several tile in there. They have no recourse if any of their stuff is damaged. And that's true to the property to the east of me, which is, my cousin. And the property to the south brings tile across there too. And again, they have no recourses to damages or anything. No.
The back of the soil type, do you think there's anything about those particular soil types that present any issues regarding to Summit digging a ditch through there and installing?
Well, other compaction, yeah, especially on the west end there, yes. And I've seen the compaction studies from Minnesota that were done some years ago. And I was at Waseca, the university, and they had done a very, scientific one with small squares and different amounts. And after they completed the study, they noticed in some of their other future studies that there was some crop loss. And so they went back, they measured and figured out which plots it was, and found in 10 years later, they were still getting some yield, measurable yield losses. It happened to be a particular dry year, I think, but even so, contrary to what some of the other studies have said that, you can mitigate this in a year or two, this deep tillage just simply moves the compaction layer down further, for the most part. It does not replace the structure that is naturally there.
And for the record, how does compaction affect the ability to grow crops?
Well, on a year like this, where we're very, very limited on water, rain, that is, the fields that I have here, and they hold a lot of water in their soil and subsoil, look quite good yet, remarkably, and even in this hot weather. So in that case, it makes a difference for those roots to go down. Water capacity is about 2 inches per foot. And so when a crop uses 20-some inches of water a year, if you don't get it as rain, it has to pull it out of the subsoil.
What kind of crops do you grow on your land?
Well, corn and soybeans.
You rotate?
Yes.
Good. Do you have concern about the effect on your crops in future years if the pipeline is put in?
Well, I'm sure it'll have an impact, yes.
Have you seen any studies or any information about the long-term impact of a project like this on crops?
Well, other than the Minnesota study, which I referred to, and as it were, I rented some ground, some east of us that was over the top of some natural gas pipelines. I think some of them put in the 30s, certainly before my memory, and we farmed over those. And of course, construction practices were different then, but you could tell where it was. And there were rocks that would work up more so than in other areas. And you could see it, even that much later.
Do you have tile under your property?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it pattern tile?
Not exactly, no, but highly, and it was been done twice. My grandfather had it tiled by hand back in the teens and 20s, at that time by Danish immigrants. So,
And
Well, it's open.
is that private tile or county?
yeah, I've got a private ground. All the tile there is private. And we go into the public drainage district, which just up less than half a mile to the east, they have to negotiate. So apparently they're going to have a quite deep boring under it as well.
So do you have concerns about your tile if the pipeline were put in?
Yes, I do. Maybe not so much for me, but the water coming in from the south. After my neighbor tiled his ground, my wet spot on that southwest corner, which much better adapted to farming than it was, because the water from uphill, wasn't coming down as in the same
We're gonna
way.
take a break, I bet.
So how would that affect your property?
What made it better? So so it's in my interest for him to keep those tile running, properly.
You talked a little bit about the risk that you are concerned about. So if there were a pipeline rupture, where would the emergency the people come from?
From Clemmy, which is would be right at 2 miles south of that pipeline, and I live a half mile north.
Are they volunteers?
Yes.
Do you know if they've had any training in responding to a CO2
I'm quite
pipeline
sure
rupture?
they have not. And as I say, the more sophisticated one in Garner, which has to deal with these natural gas and hydrous tanks, as well as a number of industries, have a lot more training. And they also have a lot, the tax base for that township is substantially higher than the one in L Township that I'm in. And so their ability to buy equipment and things is much easier than it is for our fire district. And they just recently bought partial kit for a fireman in Garner, and that was $1,400. And in Clemmy, I know we're getting close to needing a pumping truck. And the one we bought in Garner was $350,000, and it's estimated it'll be $500,000 now, and maybe a 2-year wait. So, I mean, and I'm not sure that whatever the property value increase is to the township is going to actually cover this increase. And although there are 8 miles of this pipe in this township, that's a fair amount to be concerned about.
Do you think it would help your local emergency responders to know how far the CO2 would disperse if it were released from the pipe?
Certainly. And have some notion as to where it is. Now, I understand there are CO2 monitors. I don't know how fast they work or how sensitive they are, but that would certainly be some help. You know, an ordinance would be very helpful. Now, I know someone said that it was corrosive. I don't know how the natural gas pipeline people get by with it, but so I don't know why they couldn't put an ordinance in it.
Unfortunately,
You talked about the easements a little bit. But tell us what discussions you had with Summit representatives about a proposed easement.
Gave me the copy and said, here it is. And I think I've got on my 4th one now. The original amount that they offered is still the same, although they have changed the description of the easement. To increase space on that west edge for the larger need for boring under the railroad, and it's, you know, just hangs on there.
pretty easy to
Problem.
audit.
You know, the term summit kind of harkens back to the old hog concentration occurrence, and you wonder. And in the easement, it talks about so quickly about them being able to transfer this, and that your rights to any future decisions are limited. It kind of bothers you.
How did you feel about the tactics?
Real quick, Mr. Taylor, I just got a note. Can you scoot a little bit closer to the mic?
Sure.
And Mr. Jorde, why don't you just go ahead and grab the mic from behind you, and then you guys won't have to move that mic around, if it fits.
I was too close yesterday.
We'll get there. Thank you. Go ahead.
How did you feel about the tactics the Summit representatives used in discussing the easement with you?
Actually, the 3 or 4 people that I've chatted with over the last 2 years have been really very pleasant. So I've gotten along well, but I guess I made it clear that I wasn't in any hurry. And until things look, I mean, the easement itself changed a fair amount. I wasn't terribly interested in it. Verbally, they have given me several different dollar amounts, but nothing in writing.
You prefer not to have the pipeline on your property at all, correct?
Right. Somebody else's benefit, you know, for little or no benefit to anybody else either. There was a big pitch at the time, the first meetings, about how this was going to replace 2 million cars, you know. Well, there are well over 3 million cars in the country, not to mention trucks and tractors and all kinds of other things. It's a minuscule amount of carbon. And then they went on and back to talk about the great benefit it was to ethanol. In the future, and no comment. Initially used federal and state incentives to put ethanol plants in to use corn. And besides that, sorry to be a bit disjointed.
Fine, go ahead.
We live, Hancock County is actually a corn deficit county because we feed thousands and thousands of hogs, and there's a facility over near Clorwith that has 10 billion chickens, not to mention the chickens in Wright County and other places. And so there's a lot of use for corn besides ethanol. And whether that is in fact a net advantage for CO2 is in question as well. So
I think that's all the questions I have. Mr. Meyer, Hardin County?
Good morning, sir. I'm Darrell Meyer. I'm the Hardin County Attorney representing the Hardin County Board of Supervisors. I just got a couple questions about drainage. Okay. You had said there's tile on your property. Can you use the pointer and show where those tile lines are?
and then it goes at an angle and goes this way. So they will, I'm not sure exactly on the location and, you know, and matching that, but it appears that they'll put their borehole pretty much right over the top of the tile, and then and further on,
It's used by others, but you have to maintain it. Can you explain that?
from what I understand, my grandfather was good friends to the fellows who owned the land to the south and to the west, okay? And so the tile was put in. I don't know how it was paid for. Maybe it was jointly. But the properties to the south were then alleviated. And my grandfather owned the land on the west side of the railroad at that time. And so he got drainage there, as did other people up from there.
So there's folks that are
Depending on that, yes.
relying on you to maintain your part of the line.
Yeah.
And that are depending on you to maintain your tile, subject to pipeline that's going through, or the outside of?
They're outside that, they're not,
So either you voluntarily sign an easement and you benefit,
financially from
or
that.
if there's eminent domain, you get compensated in some fashion,
Correct.
but you're burdening, or your neighbors who don't benefit are
Yeah.
bearing the burden of that risk.
Right.
I have no other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Myers, Farm Bureau.
Mr. Alden, my name is David Myers. I am an attorney for the Iowa Farm Bureau. Few questions for you, kind of picking up drainage tile. How deep is the drainage tile?
I imagine it's about 3 feet. It varies depending on the surface of the land.
And would you expect Summit to repair and restore all drainage?
They claim to do that, and that's a state law.
And if you learn years down the road, let's say 5 years down the road, that the tile was damaged, would you expect Summit to come in and repair that tile?
I'm cynical. I wouldn't expect Summit to be there. But I would hope that the state would require them to be bonded to an adequate amount to cover such things in the future.
As part of this proceeding, did you submit any comments or objections?
I did send in a comment maybe 6 weeks ago or so or more. It's interesting because I never disclosed that I had a tenant, and they somehow sent a letter to his employer informing them of, I think, wanting to survey or something. Vince Bach.
And we note on your, the Exhibit H for your parcel that there is a co-owner, Sue Lawton. Is
Yes,
that correct?
and she's right back there. Significant other.
Perfect. Are you part of any federal farm programs?
Yes, I have some CRP land along the drainage.
And do you have crop insurance?
I don't have a crop, so I don't know. I have in the past.
I believe earlier you mentioned the agricultural impact mitigation plan. Have you reviewed that?
Yes, I have tried. Plot's not very good. And I've gotten several copies of it, as if a second copy would be more persuasive than one.
Do you have any concerns with the plan?
Well, as I stated earlier, that the deep tillage over the area only moves the compaction down. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's the best you can do, mind you, at that point. But it's not like, oh, now it's ground. And then I'm going to have these holes, which have not been described to me, to bore under the road and the railroad, and I have no idea that I don't think the code speaks to such,
Do you know approximately how deep your topsoil is?
Foot or two.
And do you expect Summit to separate the topsoil?
Yes,
And
yes, I know that's required, and I don't know exactly, like I said, whether they're going to use like a backhoe and scoop it out. They say lift, but what's that described? Or use a caterpillar.
Sure, and you would expect Summit to keep the storage of the topsoil separate?
I surely hope so, and that's why the county has inspectors, and I assume that those inspectors will require them to abide by the law.
Do you have any NRCS designated highly erodible land on the property?
No,
Do you have any NRCS designated wetlands on the property?
no,
Do you have any NRCS designated wet farmlands on the property?
I don't believe so.
And I believe you,
Although the laws changed here some time ago, and I'm not quite sure. This was historically a swamp, so it could easily fall into that category under the right circumstances. Although it has been farmed for decades.
and you mentioned earlier you're part of a CR program, is that correct?
Right.
On the map on the screen, can you describe and point to the location of the CRP land?
It's the drainage ditch just to the south. But it's not real. I think this is the drainage comes across here, and then it comes along there.
Can you describe that with words too, please? Can you describe that over here, the board?
This area in here?
Yeah, while you're pointing, just describe the drainage for the record.
Oh, oops, come on.
Mr.
There
Alden,
we go.
I think that our map is showing your parcel to be the center, the very center parcel
Yeah.
here.
And I'm pointing to this because that's where Summit crosses the drainage district that I'm associated with. And why it changes colors in here, I have no idea where these colors come from. And it runs just along this edge. It's on the west side of the road, which doesn't seem to show up very well. Move to the west there. Yeah, so I was looking for the road. The road doesn't show up hardly at all. Should be right in here. Well, right in here. So like I say, I don't know what this coloration is, but it's confusing. A strip of CRP along the side of it.
Would you want Summit to reimburse you for any penalties if the USDA determines that the contract was violated due to Summit's actions on your property?
Yeah, well, they're not going to be involved. Shouldn't be anywhere near it, so it shouldn't be a problem for me. Neighbors are going to have some problems, and I don't.
Okay, for the next kind of portions of my questions, let's just assume the pipeline is granted. Would you expect Summit and its successors to follow Iowa's agricultural land restoration rules?
Yes.
Would you want to consider the option of signing an easement agreement under the best terms and compensation that Summit has offered in the past?
At least.
Exact pipeline route across your property?
Wouldn't hurt,
Would you expect Summit to acquire a new easement if they wanted to move or relocate the pipeline on your property?
Well, the easement says they can put it where they want, so. Yeah, I guess, yeah. But I don't know that is an important variable. But
Do you want the ability to be able to enter the easement area when Summit is not actively working on the easement?
yeah, that'd be fine. Not a necessity.
Would you prefer the board's final order limit where Summit can access your property?
Where or when? Where?
Where?
The easement says they can access the whole thing.
Correct. But,
Anytime, anywhere,
but would you want the board to issue an order stating where Summit can enter or exit your property?
Objection, form, and relevance.
What was the objection?
Go ahead and repeat yourself, Mr. Jorde.
Form of the question, if this witness prefers the IUB to approve the project and then put language in an order.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't, hold on, it makes any sense, because if there were a break, excuse me,
But he's objecting to the Farm Bureau's question, so we have to sort that out. So you don't have to sort out. Just sit tight for just one hot second. You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Why don't you exhibit?
Yeah. Farm Bureau, did you want to respond to the objection?
The question is just focused on, again, if the permit is granted, what would be his preferred method in the final order concerning entering or exiting the property?
Okay. Noted. Proceed with your question. So, please restate the question for the witness, please.
Mr. Alden, this question is premised on if the pipeline is granted.
Yeah.
Would you prefer that the board's final order limit where Summit can go to access your property?
I'm trying to think of how, I mean, of course, I'd like to have as much input as possible. On the other hand, is that practical if there were some problem on the pipeline and they could only access it ways? Doesn't seem to be really a useful thing to add to the easement. The thing that bothers me is that they aren't very clear about damages if they were to do so. I'd be more concerned about that than whether in fact they did it. As I said, I had farmed over some pipelines, and there were a leak in the natural gas pipeline that caused some crop damage. The company came out, fixed it, paid for damages, were quite generous, and and that was desirable for them and me. So I would assume or would hope that this pipeline would be, although Natural Pipeline has a whole lot more experience and have certain history as to how they've done things in the past, where in this case it's a whole new thing. Not only the product used, but the people running it and the experience in the whole country. I don't know of any other place that has a supercritical fluid being run through their property.
Do you know what size pipe Summit would plan to install?
Yes, presently it's 12. Initially they wanted an 8-inch, and they went to 12, which is more than 3 times the amount of CO2 liquid than was formerly thought of.
And again, if the pipeline is granted, would you want the board to issue in its final order that Summit can only install a 12-inch pipe on your property?
Yeah, the easements said 8 to 12. So I assume that the board would accept that. I don't know. What way would they? Yes, I guess.
Would you like Summit to consult with you before it decides to change the grade of the land in the easement area from the original grade?
Sure. Flat is sort of flat, but
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
okay.
Thank you. Ms. Rain, I see your placard is up. Oh, okay, we can circle back to you. We had 2 others to get first. And I don't know who was first, so I'm going to go to the back row with Ms. Coles.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alden, I have a few questions for you. I'm Jean Colas with Colas Family Farms. I'm in a similar situation as you are. And you brought up some very important information to myself and to many other landowners. Since you are on the board for the fire department, do you have concerns that your community could afford the equipment, training, and future maintenance on the pipeline?
Yes, certainly. State code limits us to how much we can levy, and that's on basis of the property value of the township, with the town out. And so, there aren't a lot of people, even though the price of land has gone up, so we get a little more value that way. But yes, but the price, as I indicated before, of the equipment is going up so rapidly that we're not going to be able to provide that, even though it's been promised. But
Okay, thank you. Oh, also, do you feel that Summit should be responsible for this before and through the entire duration that the pipeline is in operation? In other words, do you feel they should be financially responsible to provide this service to your community? Do you think Summit should pay?
yeah, I mean, if they're going to increase the risk to the community, I think it's going to exceed probably what they're covered in property taxes.
In your communication with Summit, have they offered to cover these costs?
There are, in meetings, they have said that they would provide training and equipment, but like I say, there hasn't been anything in writing.
Were you aware that the release of CO2 gas into the atmosphere is low to the ground, and it takes all the oxygen out of the air, and combustion engines stop running, so first responders might not be able to reach those in need?
Yes. And an additional thing I was thinking of is, particularly driving in today in the fog, is if there were a release of CO2, and which presents a whole lot of other issues about design of the pipe, it would turn into carbonic acid, which then I suspect may fall to the ground and acidify our soils. So I have no idea. I think it would kill vegetation, which I guess in an anecdotal issue in Texas, they had an escape at a oil rig where they were using it to frack, and it not only killed the vegetation but also fish and frogs in the waters nearby. So it's way more dangerous than natural gas.
Okay, so
There
you do
was
not.
also a comment by somebody I remember saying that claimed that natural gas was heavier than air, which is not, I don't believe, the case, and that in fact CO2 is about 50% heavier than air, so it stays to the ground, and I don't know how high it would go. Probably depends on how, lots of things. Sorry.
Oh no, that's quite all right. Do you want a CO2 pipeline in any part of your community?
It certainly increases the risk, although I do want to decrease the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but I think there may be more efficient ways to do it.
Do you know what the, how do you say, I'll leave it to the professionals to answer that question, get worded correctly. Do you feel that you should be providing with an aspersion model so you know exactly what you're dealing with and how far this could travel?
Yes.
offered to provide this to you?
No. And in state law, it says they're supposed to provide that information to the public and to government organizations and to emergency organizations, departments.
Do
And
you,
it wouldn't hurt if they would contact the local hospitals. So in the case of some accident, that they would be prepared.
do you feel that your community could be considered as collateral damage?
They could.
No further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Thank you. Sir, did you receive, I've got in my hands here something that the IUB sent out. It was called an official request. It's a trifold document. Did you receive something like this?
Yes, I responded to it, which is why I wound up here in circumstances I didn't quite anticipate.
Okay, and that was kind of my question. So despite receiving the mailing from the IUB, you didn't know that you could bring evidence or submit evidence of your own, is that right?
I may have, I don't know, I don't.
Okay, when you started your testimony, made the statement that you didn't realize it was going to be so formal, and you stated that you didn't have any documents with you. I'm just trying to clarify that.
Right, I don't. I've written a whole lot of notes of things that I've kind of semi-researched without having, as examples. After taking this job as a trustee, reading up what our responsibilities were, and then when this came up, the Summit and some other people have sent the mitigating ag mitigation projects information code to us, so you kind of read that, and then since it's on the web, you look it up and try to get an idea of what the parameters are of this sort of thing, and then when you look under hazardous liquids, and you think you read something. I know I see Summit keeps bringing up parts of the code, but they don't seem to get down to 89B24. Individuals have an inherent right to know the full range of the risk, and then on and on. And 5 of that is local fire and other government emergency response departments require detailed information, which would lend to think that we should have that sort of at least rough idea, realizing all the variables, wind, temperature, amount. They could give us a hint of that kind of information. And so I don't know if they don't have it, don't know what it is, which, it's sort of level of incompetence, or whether they have it and they're just withholding it for some reason. When in fact it says it's supposed to be by code, we're supposed to be informed.
Would you be surprised to learn that Summit has vehemently, for months, fought the disclosure of its dispersion or risk analysis so that the communities of Iowa could know what's going on here?
Yeah, and you suspect that there's a alternative moment for that.
Well, yeah, let me ask you.
And there was I think a document in your emails that I wound up getting. Geez, I can't see how you guys can read them all. If you're retired and have nothing better to do, well, you can get through some of them. There was a fellow that dealt with natural pipelines that gave some indication as to what the risks were and the differences between natural gas and although of course it's hard to talk about anything like supercritical liquids because I don't know that there's any real evidence of how to deal with that. So,
did you say that you suspect there might be ulterior?
Well, I haven't a clue.
Yeah. But would you agree that if someone was actually proud of how safe this pipeline is, there'd be no reason to hide how dangerous it actually is.
Yeah, because initially they were selling it as just CO2 gas, vaporizing into the air, no problems at all, absolutely no risk.
Do you recall them saying, well, CO2, it's in soda pop, for goodness sakes? Yeah, and did that lead you to believe, or do you perceive that that was to induce you and the public that this is just totally fine?
Yes.
Yeah. And are you aware that CO2 is colorless, odorless, and heavier than air, so it would sink to the level where humans and animals are located?
Certainly.
You were asked some questions about the proposed diameter of the pipeline on your property. Would you be surprised to learn that in the easement rights, Summit would like this board to force upon you, against your will, in their favor, that they seek the ability to locate a 24-inch pipeline on your property?
Yeah, because it isn't in the latest easement. But if the board were to do that, will they have to renegotiate all the easements that they previously signed at different pipeline diameters?
Well, I can't answer that question, but it's a good rhetorical question. Would you be surprised to learn that a 24-inch pipeline, if there was an unintended release or rupture or leak, could generate a plume that would travel over 4,500 feet?
Oh, I think it's substantially more than that.
Okay. And when we look at, and if I could ask someone to zoom out on the Exhibit H parcel that's on the big screen there, please. When you first started testifying, your initial testimony, you were kind of going around your property and estimating in distances the different farmsteads nearby. And would you agree with me that the one to the north of you is within a half mile of where the proposed route would be approximately?
Yep, that's where I live.
Yep. And do you live there with your significant other who you mentioned?
Yes, and my father.
And your elder?
Yes.
And he would be someone that would need assistance in case of an emergency and would be slow moving, correct?
Well, it certainly would be at 3%. Yes.
And then to the south of the proposed pipeline route,
Yeah,
that's
less
it.
than half. And to the east there, I don't know, a few hundred yards. And if you go up the line, it goes right, it's right across another property. Again, these, for rescue, for fire and rescue, it's going to be a problem because you're never going to get there in time to do a heck of a lot, except, as I suggested to my supervisor, the state county supervisor, yes, really who they ought to call as opposed to the emergency manager is our local undertaker.
Right, yep. And so the people to the south there, you notice how their land is not in red and there's no proposed pipeline there. You notice that?
And I don't believe either one of them have been, any of these other people have been informed of the risk, which is in violation.
Certainly. And would you be surprised to learn that this commission denied intervention of persons that could be affected due to their location of the proximity of the route, but who were not an Exhibit H parcel owner or had the route directly on? And do you think that's unfair for persons to not be able to be a part of this who are just as much or more at risk than Exhibit H landowners potentially?
Yes. As with the tile drainage as well. And as I say, I know several examples across here where the landowners that aren't going to be directly affected will be indirectly affected and have no recourse.
You had mentioned about CO2 concentrations in the 30,000 parts per million, and that based on your research, that was a hazard level that OSHA had identified, correct?
Correct, as well as even the International Fire Association.
And are you aware that exposure levels of 30,000 parts per million approaching up to 50,000 in that band or range can cause serious and significant injury and health risks?
Which is why they use it in slaughter plants.
That's right, and that's a good point. CO2 is actually used to euthanize hogs, correct?
Yes, and cattle, I believe,
Sure.
and chickens. Poultry barns when under quarantine.
Have you done any research related to the Satartia, Mississippi explosion release and nearly 50 people having to be evacuated and going to the hospital?
Yes, I'm aware of it. Also, that doesn't get much attention is the fact that when they tried to recharge that line, and so they were forced to stop and let that thaw out and then reintroduce that, which leads to another question I had with this pipeline is what happens if there pressure drops in this line for some unknown reason anywhere along the line. The natural gas guy talked about how the behavior of liquids in a pipeline under pressure behave and having to shut off the pumps on one side or the other in order not to make things worse. That and also if you drop the pressure, if from what I understand, and I'm no expert obviously, a physical chemist, but it moves from the liquid state to a gaseous state without being a dry ice. What is the pressure then inside that pipe? If it expands, and if it's even at 1,000 pounds, that's about 72 times the pressure of outside air. And so if you have that expanding like that inside the pipe, so, does the whole 20 miles of it blow up then? And seems to be a lot of unknowns here.
Are you aware that the entire volume of CO2 molecules within the pipe distance between shutoff valves, assuming that the valves operate and are timely shut off, would in fact release into the atmosphere if there was a rupture?
Well, I'm not aware how they operate, but
Okay.
and there's one theoretically where you see that up and down line that there'll be one there, and I know, for instance, my neighbor and relative, and I know the people farming that they intend to put a valve there, and they insist on putting it in the middle of the field to make it inconvenient to farm, and they don't seem to be particularly interested in moving it for some unknown reason.
You mentioned operating pressures. Are you aware that they're unlike oil pipelines, that on CO2 pipelines there's both a minimum operating pressure that they must stay above and a maximum that they shall not exceed? Did you know that?
I didn't know there was a maximum, but I know that Summit has indicated it was about a 2,200 pound pressure that they intended to use, which is substantially higher, I think, than any natural gas.
You were asked some questions from Farm Bureau about, would you expect Summit to do certain things based on drainage or tiling, or would you expect them essentially to do the right thing? And my question to you, based on what do you think the value of your expectations are?
The value of my...
Yeah, what do you think Summit has to do a darn thing about your expectations?
No.
Okay.
No company does, do they?
No, of course not. And you understand that they are in business money only.
Kind of.
You kind of picked up on that.
Yes.
And you had mentioned the Summit name maybe not being the best name in Iowa. What did that have to do with?
Summit Ag and the siting of hog facilities back in the era of when hog production was changing rapidly.
And is that also backed by this project?
Yes.
Do you
And we've also had dealings with, 2 points. one with the DeCoster building in Wright County, which is just to the south of Hancock, and with the windmill companies who said they would provide monies to fix the roads, but the county wound up having to fix all the roads. And I don't know what the damage to the society is going to be with possible man camps here and there. I've seen where Summit has decided to put their staging areas either. And although they put in windmills and whatnot recently near me, they had a big square where they could pile all this stuff, and that has an impact too on the community.
If this project was so important to Mr. Rastetter, would you expect him to come here and testify about how great it is?
Yeah, because no one else seems, I don't know, everybody else is pleading ignorance. Oh, that's not my department.
And that's common when you have inquiry and question about this pipeline, that people are friendly, but it's like, oh, talk to so-and-so and so-and-so, and you never get any answers, right?
And I know, and sitting in on my supervisors of dealings with them, it's much the same with them as well.
In terms of them not having information.
Yeah, they had this presentation which they gave, and that was pretty much it.
Okay. It's kind of a one-way information and not much follow-up or detail.
Correct.
Yeah. Are you aware that Summit Carbon Solutions LLC doesn't own a single bulldozer, backhoe, or any piece of heavy equipment?
No, didn't surprise me. And the argument that, and I have some friends who lobby for the labor industry, and I'm sympathetic to labor, may believe that there are going to be lots of jobs. But almost everybody I've dealt with is from out of state. And there aren't, with an unemployment level in the 3%, there aren't that many steel workers and welders and things in Iowa to do this project. So most of that labor is going to be from out of state. And they're not going to be here very long. And like I say, they're going to be in man camps somewhere. And you've seen what happens in northern Dakota with that sort of thing.
Do you think it's in the economic interest of Iowa and Iowans in general to accept 700 miles of hazardous pipeline for potentially 2 years or less employment of out-of-state persons who will be paying out-of-state taxes?
Doesn't seem very good. The net doesn't seem very good. And as far as the ethanol plants go, as I had said, I think earlier, the government supported the generation of these plants, and then they mandated the requirement of using it, and now we're required to prop them up again with these carbon credits. And although I sold my corn into that same market, it did it at numerous different prices. So,
when you've researched this project, have you been able to pinpoint what the claimed purpose of the project actually is?
well, for some, it's the transportation, and they pick up the carbon credits from that.
So money is the purpose.
Yeah, my tax money, or everybody else's tax money. As I tell my friends, I'm going to get compensated. You're paying me.
Well, and actually you're paying yourself. You pay taxes to the federal government, right?
Yeah, income tax on the amount that they may give me.
And are you aware that if tax credits to the tune of billions of dollars, $1.5 billion more dollars a year to Summit alone, if this project were to be approved, that tax revenue has to be made up somewhere? Do you understand that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Would you like to pay more taxes so that this company can have the corporate welfare known as the 45Q tax credits?
I don't.
Do you think that's in the interest of the state of Iowa to take one for the team so that Summit Carbon and its wealthy investors can become more wealthy?
No, it's too bad they can't be leased to the people, at least, that the land is being used. I have a friend who negotiated with a company to put up a radio tower, cell tower, and it's on a very small block of land, or the windmills for that example, and they get leases. They get $5,000-6,000 a year
Forever.
for
the length
This
of the-
would happen to be 30 years, but
Right.
well, for the life of the and that's interesting too, because the body of the easement says that it's forever, non-exclusive. I'm not quite sure what that means. And in their C portion of that, they said, oh, well, we'll abide by the code and it will revert in 5 years if we don't complete or abandon. So I don't know where they're at with that.
Well, but you understand they determine what the word abandon means.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So if they're in control of the triggers that would lead to the 5-year period being called, do you have much confidence that that 5-year period would ever be called?
No, well, no.
Okay. In the perpetual portion of the easement, would you agree that that's turning your land potentially, if approved, into a liability as opposed to the asset it is today?
Yes. And I think there have been examples where parcels have been sold, some with easements and some out, and there is some loss in value.
Would you be willing to purchase a new property if you knew there was a CO2 pipeline already on it?
Well, if the price is right, huh? No.
So, and would you, follow up on that answer, would you expect a significant discount if you were to shoulder that risk?
A certain amount. I'd have no idea how you put that in a dollars amount.
Okay. As between, if there was a simultaneous auction for a quarter section with a CO2 pipeline presently on it and one without, would you have a preference which one you would purchase?
Well, you take the one without, of course, yes.
Okay.
Especially when it's an unknown. Now, had it been a natural pipeline, probably not so much, because that's a known risk. Here we have an unknown risk.
An unknown risk with a applicant who is failing and refusing to share the risks.
Correct.
Sir, is it safe to say that you believe the location of any such hazardous CO2 pipeline as proposed in this docket would cause a significant economic hardship to you?
Any place, well, I mean, it diminishes, with distance, but.
Well, on your particular property.
Yeah.
Is there any, would the location of this hazardous pipeline forever on your property, do you believe, promote or be convenient to you in any way?
No, I don't think it provides me with any benefit.
And is it necessary for you in your current farming operations in any way?
No, I mean, in the most indirect way, and possibly with price of corn. I mean, but it gets to be a long chain of possibility,
Well, let me ask you about the price of corn. If the price of corn goes up, is that in a vacuum a positive, or does rising prices over here have effects elsewhere, in your view?
Of course. I mean, the war in Ukraine makes the value of wheat and corn different than it was before. It's a global market, and so and it's a local market. We have competing interests between my local town has a grain mill that provides mostly hog feed. We've got 10 million chickens across, a couple miles to the west, and they eat a lot of feed. And an ethanol plant in Mason City and you see corn going all directions.
Has any ethanol plant put in writing to you a promise that they would pass on the alleged increase in basis that is purportedly forecasted to be for a short period of time should this pipeline get approved?
Of course not.
Of course not. the ability for Summit, if this was approved, to assign, transfer, or sell their interest in your land to any person on earth, Saudi Arabia, anyone in the Middle East, China, does that concern you?
Yes, because although it does say that they're supposed to continue the same things that are agreed upon in the easement, it gets more difficult to deal with them. I know examples of people who are trying to get damages from other pipeline installations for a number of years, and they have a whole lot more lawyers than we do. So it just sort of drags on and on.
Well, speaking about a lot more lawyers, do you understand that despite what your expectations might be of what you would like Summit to do, that if there are damages caused by them during construction, that you have to prove it to them, satisfy them before you can be paid?
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
And do you know
And
that?
besides that, they're a limited corporation out of Delaware with offices in Iowa.
Do you have any idea if they have any assets at all? Summit Carbon Solutions LLC.
Have
Assets.
assets? Yes, they do.
What
All
what
the
are assets?
easements that they've signed, they can use as assets.
Do you think a series of disconnected easements have any value?
Well, they were willing to pay a fair amount for them. I wonder if they can't get bank loans with them on the promise, I mean, venture capital is a high risk sort of thing, against huge profits.
Well, and at the end of the day, this is simply a company with a dream, an LLC and a dream that has a business plan and is taking a risk like anyone else. You understand that?
They've certainly not tried to campaign any kind of green solution.
Well, and speaking of that, you had mentioned that you personally would like there to be less CO2 in the atmosphere. And so I have a question. Do you understand that this carbon that allegedly people are trying to solve here, that the carbon is already in the corn, that the ethanol production does not create more carbon? Do you understand that?
I'm not sure. No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't sure.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious what, if you know.
Well, I
what
didn't know whether in the fermenting process, whether it took some atmospheric carbon out or not, but it makes sense that it doesn't.
And you had stated that, again, along the lines, you'd like there to be less carbon in the atmosphere. Are you aware of the proposed transportation methods to get this alleged clean ethanol from Iowa to California and these low fuel markets is by truck that would have to burn more carbon?
Your Honor.
Okay, all right.
And the
Do you have an objection? Hold on, Mr. Alden. Do you have an objection,
I was
Mr. Zablinski?
hoping to wait until between witnesses, because this really is not Mr. Alden's fault. I apologize for the interruption, but this is just going on so long and so far that we need to clear up some procedure, I think, here. Mr. Jorde has certainly been doing a lot more testifying than the witness. It has been full of speculation, legal conclusions, often misinformation, particularly about those legal conclusions. And, frankly, the lawyers in general have been doing a lot more testifying than the witnesses. And there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, these are witnesses who have chosen not to be full parties. And my understanding of the board's order, and if I am wrong, the board can certainly tell me so, was that this was an opportunity for people that chose not to be parties to come and talk about their specific property and the specific impacts and features of their property. One of the problems of, now we're talking about, do you know what the transportation is to get ethanol to California, aside from the fact that it's not remotely about the property, is that unlike a party, there was no opportunity for discovery. there was no pre-filed testimony. We have witnesses up here talking about highly technical subjects, scientific matters, from metallurgy to soil sciences to economics to climate science, without any idea what their actual background or qualifications on those topics are. And I say that broadly, not talking specifically about Mr. Alden. And they're actually covering a broader range of topics in scope than I suspect an individual witness for a party that pre-filed testimony and is limited to the scope of that pre-filed testimony would be able to. This seems like a gaping loophole in the process, and given the amount of time it's taking, surely can't be what the board envisioned. I think there are some real fairness issues with regard to Summit's ability to do its due diligence and prepare for these witnesses. These are people that chose not to be parties that had that opportunity. I think this opportunity is being grossly misused by some of the attorneys to be able to enter their own testimony, not to mention the occasional casual slander of Summit or Mr. Rastetter, and that certainly shouldn't be permitted.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Jorde.
yeah, move to object, the speaking objection, number one. And yes, this process has been greatly abused by Summit. It's completely unfair to the landowners involved, including this gentleman right here. There is no time limit on the questions asked. They wanted the hearing, we didn't. That's their fault if this is quote unquote going longer than they think it should or is convenient for them. We have a right to ask questions to the witnesses that are here. Despite Mr. Dublinsky's comments, I don't believe this witness is less than other witnesses, and I'm offended that that was suggested. And if there were concerns, he should have been objecting a long time ago. He waived all those objections, and the door's wide open.
The objection is sustained. Anna, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sorry, Ms. Ryan, I apologize.
I would like to suggest that this giant loophole that Mr. Dublinsky is claiming exists is because of the change of order of presentation of evidence in this testimony. Other attorneys have no opportunity other than to make assumptions about what's going to be happening because Summit has not yet testified as to the facts that attorneys want to ask questions about. I remind the board that Board Rule 7.23, which is titled Order of Presenting Evidence, states that normally the petitioner shall open the presentation of evidence. When determining the order of the evidence, Rule 7.23 subsection 3 states that the board shall take into account the preferences of the parties. There is not a single party to this proceeding who indicated a preference for having the non-intervening Exhibit H landowners testify first. We can resolve all of these problems very easily by having the party who filed the petition, who has the burden of proof, who has the information that landowners need in order to understand the impacts of the pipeline on their property and to be able to answer questions in an informed manner about their property by simply having Summit present its testimony first, as is normally done.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. It seems to me that, first of all, the board correctly wants to hear from the landowners. Your duty under 479B.1 is to protect the landowners. These landowners who have not intervened and are not represented by council, you can argue, well, they should have hired attorneys, but, that takes money. And they're not required to hire an attorney. And from what we've heard and what we understand, the landowners were not given real clear directive as to what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to present their information. And I honestly don't think that any of the questions the attorneys have asked are beyond the scope of what the board envisioned. We're talking about the impact on the landowners, their land, and I think it's very important for the board to hear what the landowners have to say, and that's what we're trying to bring out.
And I just have to add, and I would like a standing objection to prior to the commencement of any witness that is a non-summit witness on the basis of fundamentally depriving everyone else of due process in this matter. So I don't need to make that objection every single time. That should be a standing objection, please. And I would like to know what objection was sustained, because I didn't hear an objection. I just heard a speech by Mr. Dubinsky.
Yeah, Ms. Ryan, I'm sorry.
I apologize, I keep forgetting to put that back down.
That's all right. We'll get this down. Mr. Dubinsky.
Yes, and certainly if Mr. Taylor were correct that that was the limited scope of the questions that attorneys had been asking, there would be no objection. But I think it's abundantly clear that we are well beyond just talking with landowners about impacts to their specific properties. We have been all over the map with some of these witnesses, well beyond the scope. But fundamentally, what I want to point out is there is absolutely no due process problem. That is an idle threat to the board. The only people that actually have a right to participate in a proceeding are the parties. The board has a long tradition that we certainly have no objection to of allowing non-party Exhibit H landowners to have a say and to hear from them, as Mr. Taylor suggests. That does not mean, contrary to what opposing counsel has suggested, that there should be no difference between a party and a non-party. This is actually process above and beyond what's required, far from an absence of due process. Again, we're not objecting to that part of it, but we do think there has to be some limit on what the other attorneys can use that for, particularly when we haven't had any opportunity for discovery or pre-filed testimony.
Okay. Mr. Dubinsky's objection in this matter is sustained. We are well beyond the scope. We'd remind the parties that the witnesses were permitted, that landowners were permitted to testify about their property and the potential implications of the potential line to that property. We obviously are going to have some leniency with pro se litigants. We'd expect the attorneys to respect that and ask that we keep it within the scope of their property. I'd also remind everyone that we have several witnesses left today, and we will finish all of these witnesses today. All right, now,
So,
do we have, hold on,
go ahead.
just hold on one second, I'll get right to you. All right. After all that, where were we with questions?
I was asking questions.
Mr. Jorde, go ahead.
Yeah. Did you have a clarifying question, sir?
No, well, I'm trying to figure out just exactly what you guys are up to.
We all are.
We
Yeah,
just
but where
asked,
I fit into this whole scheme.
you're doing
But
fine.
it seems limited when you say just the land, because I think the people ought to be more important than just the land. And so my.
Just a reminder, if you clap, it's difficult for
Yeah.
the court reporter to get that on record. Please repeat.
And I guess the thing, I made flocks of notes before I came, because I had no clue as to what was going on, and to inform myself of the project, as it were, the whole thing. And I don't know that I'm unique when it comes to the land. It's a little different, but every piece of land's a little different. And nothing remarkable in that. My point was to, as a trustee for the township and its emergency response, which is more to the people than it is the land, although you could extend that to say, well, if there were a rupture of some sort and it provided, devastated my land and acidified my land, it would be in the narrow notion that it is. But so I guess I've expended that to my responsibility as a trustee to the whole township for the emergency and medical services and providing that from the property taxes that we levy, and then how it affects me, and my neighbors. And the rest of the people I sort of represent, you know, from my exalted position as trustee. And then to call someone on account that for me to make decisions on fire department, we have to know what some of these risks are, at least in some vague way, as opposed to just being told that, oh, well, it's nothing, no problem. You know, I'm trying to be helpful as opposed, you know.
To answer.
And to add, and it's sort of to his question about transferring it out to California. It is my opinion that a properly run pipeline would probably be safer than trains and or trucks. But that means it has to be run safely, and those ideas aren't there. The federal government hasn't provided rules, from what I understand. I was at the meeting in Des Moines. They claim they don't have regulations. Someone claims, oh, they're going to follow the natural pipeline regulations, but that's not CO2, liquid CO2, or supercritical liquid. So that's not any kind of real thing. So, you know, poor landowners are out here kind of bewildered when the point of having a lawyer. I don't know why I should have to go to great expense and effort, which I have done, to go to protect my property from an intrusion that I had not wanted, you know. Sorry.
You're doing fine. You asked a question off the bat. You didn't know what all that meant. You know, you're doing fine. With landowners, we want to give you an opportunity to come up here, be heard first. We would just expect the attorneys who don't represent you to confine most of their argument for their case to their witnesses. So our conversation was specifically directed at the attorneys who are talented and trained and know that they should keep their questions tightened to a scope. So you're doing fine. We're going to be very, very, very lenient with landowners.
It's interesting to hear from someone is, you know, some of these issues that I have, but if there's someone in the house that's in the position to answer.
I'm going to turn you back over to Mr. Jorde. Mr. Jorde is still your witness.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the negotiations or the presentation of easement, you had mentioned, I think, 3 or 4 visits that you may have had with Summit. Is that correct?
3 or 4 different land representatives or easement representatives. They brought me numerous copies of the same easement, slightly changed in the last page as to which is contradictory, as I said, to the body of the thing. And so I really don't know. I have shown it to friends who have legal expertise, and they, just as a courtesy to them out of curiosity. So, but I attempted to try to generate a easement because from what I've heard, there haven't been a lot of flexibility in that area.
And in terms of just the threshold question of, do you believe you have a duty to take your time out of your life to review an easement, look at an easement for a hazardous project that you do not want?
Well, that's a burden on me and my time, and I don't think I've done my partner any good by going on, and she's not happy about having this at all. So, yeah, it's a burden.
Okay. All right, sir. Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the parties? Board Member Burns?
Yep, and just quick, Mr. Alden, and these are kind of for clarification on the record. So trustee for what township?
L Township, Hancock County.
Can you spell that for me, please?
ELL.
ELL, okay. And you mentioned something about being on a fire board. What fire board is that?
Clemmy
Fire.
and Garner.
Both of them.
Both of them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm officially my residence is in the Clemmy district, but in that the township is divided, I wind up being in both.
And based on your property, it almost looks like on the map that you're smack dab between Clemmy and Garner-ish?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And besides being in a school district that's 20 miles away.
Gotcha. And I'm familiar with Highway 18, traveled that many times.
Oh.
All the big white tanks. And so
Yeah.
I assume that's what you're referring to when you talked about the anhydrous and the natural gas in the area.
Correct.
And so, do you know, by being on the fire board, are there annual trainings that take place from those companies with your fire departments?
Yes.
Are they required to do that?
I don't think there's a requirement.
But there is annual training that takes place.
I don't know the frequency. I have some anecdotal information from
Sure.
the county supervisor who was involved with that. They were doing a mock-up of that, right? So they simulated a rupture. I don't remember whether it was natural gas or anhydrous, but they call hazmat. But unfortunately, a train happened to be parked across the road, so of course they couldn't get there. So I mean, it points out the problems you have with those kind of things. But and I know that the Garner Fire Department has much more training than the Clemmy one in that, and more equipment for it at some expense to the district, which we begrudge.
Okay. Thank you. And then, as far as the negotiation process, you made it sound as though it's kind of a drop and go, if you will. So they would maybe drop off an easement, you would
Yeah.
take a look at it. Not, again, I would have this vision in my head of, two individuals sitting down at a table, having a conversation and true negotiations back and forth. That's not the process.
No.
Okay.
He just presents it. We have a little chat. There's a nice fellow from Pennsylvania, coal mining, you learn stuff. This guy's presently from Texas. And, we live out in the country. We don't see a lot of people.
So during that negotiation process,
No.
well, but okay, they would drop something off. Did you ever ask for anything in return in terms of like changes made or alterations in the easement? Did you ever make a request back?
I may have. I don't recall.
Okay.
But I think the response wasn't really there. I'd have to find whoever could make that decision.
And
I have no idea what their expertise is.
Okay.
But they must get paid pretty well.
And I do want the record to always reflect fact. And so you did mention, or we did have, or witness a conversation about Sartarsha, Mississippi.
Yeah, I'm up. I think I've read a news article about it. I have not read the federal,
Okay.
what would you call it, report.
So,
I've seen, parts of it. But I've not studied it.
so for the record, is the product that was in Sartarsha, Mississippi the exact same product as what we're talking about with this project?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
This is substantially more dangerous, in my opinion.
And one of the things you mentioned too, and I'm curious just quickly to expand on this, you said something about man camps in North Dakota. What happened that this gives you concern?
Well, you're going to have how many hundreds of people here, and I doubt if they're going to commute back and forth to Texas daily, and so they're going to have to live somewhere. Well, there aren't that many hotels in Hancock County, I can tell you, and so they're going to live in trailers and tents and I don't know where. And I don't think that someone did, or it's not, Summit winds up being responsible because they're hiring the contractors that do this. It may be the contractor's responsibility to do that. I don't know. But, you just see what the results are. You see what the symptoms are. You may not may not know what the underlying causes are.
And the symptoms being,
Well, you're gonna put 50 or 60 people into, that's an awful lot of people in the local restaurants or bars, and, or hundreds of people. And that has an impact, has historically had an impact. In boom towns, I mean, this isn't a new term.
so
the concept.
a negative impact, you're saying?
Well, I imagine the restaurant, you know, would be good for them.
Sure.
But,
Okay.
I doubt if the churches will be any fuller, but.
I think that's all the clarifications I have. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. Alden, you are excused.
So before he's excused, I would just like a standing objection so I don't have to keep remaking it. After any conclusion of board testimony, or pardon me, questioning of any witness, that we have a standing objection to not being able to ask questions based on board questions. And I only say that so I don't have to make this objection every single time with every witness.
Appreciated. Yep, and you will have absolute ample time to rehabilitate your own witnesses, but your objection's noted. Thank you, Mr. Jorde. Mr. Alden, you're